Hello, men, and welcome to this week's men's devotional. I've got my trusty list behind me, which are marks of a mature Christian man that we are seeking to aspire to as a church for us as men at West Covina Christian Church. I want us to see us be godly men in the church, in our home, for us to be representatives of Christ, to live with integrity, to practice spiritual disciplines, and to be able to have the ability to resist temptation. And so when I think about those godly characteristics that we aspire to as men, I'm going to turn us to a passage in 1 Timothy 3 that will probably take us a few weeks to cover, because there's a lot here. In fact, it's a passage that's meant a lot for me. I'll explain that in a minute. But this is 1 Timothy 3, and I'll read verses 1 through 3. Here is a trustworthy saying: whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. And there's a few other things that are mentioned here, but I just read these three verses because this is a list for us that applies to so many things that are here. Part of the reason why this passage means so much to me is this was read at my ordination service when I became a pastor. These are qualifications for an overseer. But I have thought about what does it really mean to be an overseer? Well, without trying to sound silly about it, an overseer is someone who oversees things. And so oftentimes this is applied, rightly so, to a church and to the pastor of a church who oversees the ministry and the leadership and the direction of the church. But each of us have different areas of oversight in our own lives, because you oversee your family. You have responsibilities at your work or in school or among your group of friends or your community group. You see, each of us have areas of our lives that we have influence and responsibility in. We are overseers in that sense. And so while this passage applies specifically to overseers in a church, I'd like us to also step back and think about how all of these qualities listed here, being above reproach, faithful to your wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and the list goes on, how do all of these things apply to each of us in the areas of responsibility in our lives? First of all, Paul tells Timothy, you are to be above reproach. Reproach is disapproval or disappointment. To be above reproach is to live as someone who could not be accused of wrongdoing. Your reputation would be such that others would know that you would always seek to do what is right. Doesn't necessarily mean that you always do what is right. Like, you're going to mess up, mistakes are going to be made, but no one could even question your motives because they know your heart, your intentions. You might have messed up, but you're humble, you apologize, and on all things, to the best of your ability, with God's help, you seek to live in such a way that would be pleasing, not only to the Lord, but to the community that you are involved in, be that your family or your church or your workplace. You are above reproach in the eyes of others. Now, Paul not only mentions being above reproach here, but he describes Timothy in this way in Acts chapter 16. Acts 16, 1 through 3 says, Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was Jewish and a believer, and whose father was a Greek. The believers in Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him, and so Paul wanted to take him along on the journey. Isn't that interesting that Timothy had this good reputation in multiple communities, in Lystra and in Iconium? So in other words, Timothy was above reproach both at home and abroad. There's some application there for us, isn't there? Could we say that we live with integrity, both at our home and in other areas of life? Are we representing Christ, both at home and in the church and wherever we are working or spending a lot of our time? God wants us to live above reproach in all these areas of our lives. And so, man of God, here's my question for you today in this devotional. Is there an area of your life that you could improve in? An area of character, an action, a habit, an attitude, a way of speaking? Is there an area that maybe you are falling short in that God is calling you to say, if you are to be a man above reproach, because that is a beautiful thing. Your reputation precedes you, so to speak. You live as a man who would not be accused of wrongdoing, but you represent Christ and God's ways well. Is there an area where you could improve in, a home or abroad? If there's an area of consistent shortcoming in my life, I would have to say it's probably my attitudes towards others. I tend to harbor hard feelings, or have a grudge, or hold feelings that wouldn't be pleasing to the Lord to others who disappoint me in one way or another. And I know it affects my leadership at home or at church or in other places. And so I ask that you pray for me. Help me to grow in this area. And brothers, I want us all to support and pray for one another. If there's an area that comes to mind that you feel like the Lord is leading you to grow in so that you can be above reproach, simply send me a text. And I promise I'll pray for you about that. We're here for one another. So, brothers, whoever aspires to be an overseer, which you are, in one way or another, you desire a noble task. Now, the overseer is to be above reproach. May God help us this week. God bless you.